completing my full overview of the Epstein files in my last video, I decided to conduct today sort of a more piercing investigation into one particular theory surrounding Epstein's death. And that is the seemingly insane theory that Jeffrey Epstein is still alive. Now, trust me, I know exactly how that sounds, and I'll be the first one to say it. I have no idea exactly what happened to Jeffrey Epstein on that morning of August 10th, 2019. I'm not drawing any conclusions today. All I really wanted to do was explore this very interesting and honestly kind of compelling theory. Today, I'm going to present all of that evidence, all of the different theories and sort of signs that he might have escaped that night. And I will leave it up to you to decide by the end of the video what you think actually happened. Based on our probes into the files from the previous video, it is an undeniable fact that Epstein had solid connections reaching into the most powerful elites, nations, and intelligence agencies on Earth. He might have even possessed such a level of blackmail that allowing him to die and subsequently risking that information leaking to the public or into the wrong hands was simply not an option. These potential high-level connections to intelligence, both foreign and domestic, along with the financial power he possessed, leads to the possibility that an escape was orchestrated potentially by the very organizations who claimed to be bringing him to justice. What you're about to see and hear is a few layers deeper than what has been covered in the mainstream. If you've chosen to commit to this insane journey with me today, then please take a moment to get comfortable, collect anything you'd like to have with you, and strap in. We're kicking this video off with literally one of the scariest things I found during my entire search in the Epstein files thus far. I literally was looking over my shoulder as I was writing this section of the script, sitting in a coffee shop. As common of a joke as it is to claim that you're on like an FBI watch list or that you're being monitored by the government, it actually happened to somebody here, and it happened to somebody who really didn't seem to do anything dangerous or anything that really warranted that suspicion, aside from the fact that they claimed to be blowing the whistle on something related to the Epstein investigation. I say that this is one of the scariest things I found in the Epstein files because it proves that that actually happens, and it happens to ordinary people like you and me who are simply discussing things that we find to be a little bit off. First, I need to provide some context. In August of 2019, Jeffrey Epstein was being held at the MCC, short for the Metropolitan Correctional Center in New York. Officially, this is where Jeffrey Epstein took his own life on the 10th of August, 2019. Obviously, though, the exact manner of this death has been viciously debated ever since it occurred. The MCC is not a prison. It is a federal administrative detention facility. According to the Los Angeles Times, it is often referred to as the Guantanamo of New York due to its intense, sophisticated security measures. Although what they meant by sophisticated security measures is not exactly clear and is very debatable based on the information we're about to get to. To begin, let's outline how the official story goes before getting into some of the facts that, well, don't exactly fit neatly into this puzzle. At around 10:40 p.m. on August the 9th, Epstein was reportedly locked in his cell for the night. This is the last time officially that he was ever seen alive. He was in the cell alone as his cellmate had been removed on the 23rd of July, a little over 2 weeks earlier. Following this, two MCC guards, Michael Thomas and Tova Noel, were required to check on him every 30 minutes. Except that they didn't. The two guards failed to conduct any of their required 30-minute checks during that overnight period, with both of them reportedly falling asleep. According to official reports, Epstein wasn't discovered until about 6:30 a.m. during their morning rounds when Tova Noel and her partner began distributing breakfast. She reportedly approached the cell, saw the body, and immediately alerted Michael Thomas, sounding the body alarm. There were attempts to perform CPR, and finally, he was immediately transported to New York Presbyterian Lower Manhattan Hospital, which sat several blocks away. There, he was pronounced dead just 9 minutes later at 6:39 a.m. News of his death on that day reached mainstream publications over 2 hours later, with the two earliest articles coming from the New York Post at 8:56 a.m. and ABC News at 8:59 a.m., both of these being in EST. The absolute earliest public report of his death came at 8:54 a.m. in a tweet from ABC News correspondent Aaron Katersky. Before this point, it was not public knowledge that Jeffrey Epstein was dead. With the official timeline having been established, prepare to have your mind blown. A lot of people have covered the post I'm about to mention, so you might have seen it before, but I haven't seen many cover the full story behind it, diving all the way to the bottom, and this one section is a rabbit hole. On the morning of August 10th, at 8:16 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, an anonymous post was made to 4chan's politically incorrect board, simply stating, "Don't ask me how I know, but Epstein died an hour ago from hanging, cardiac arrest. Screen cap this." Of course, with this post coming over a full half hour before any public discussion arose regarding Epstein's death, the replies didn't take the claim very seriously at first. Within this discussion, in the minutes that followed, still before any public announcement had been made, a separate anonymous user posted the following, and this is the important one. Not saying anything after this, please do not try to dox me, but last night after 4:15 count, they took him medical in a wheelchair, front cuffed, but not one triage nurse says they spoke to him. Next thing we know, a trip van shows up. We do not do releases on the weekends unless a judge orders it. Next thing we know, he's put in a single-man cell and hangs himself. Here's the thing, the trip van did not sign in, and we did not record the plate number, and a guy in a green dress military outfit was in the back of the van, according to the tower guy who let him through the gate. You guys, I am shaking right now, but I think they switched him out. Now, if it was just left at that, this could all just be interpreted as a wild coincidence. Crazy conspiracy talk like this happens all the time on 4chan. Any person with half a brain could tell you there's no way this guy actually worked at the MCC, probably didn't even live in New York, and was likely just some anonymous troll posting from God knows where. Nothing worth looking into, right? Well, the FBI didn't think so. We now turn to this document, a 274-page PDF detailing a very rapid response by the United States District Court for the Southern District of New York. Inside, we learn that the DOJ immediately, like literally the day after Epstein died, opened a grand jury proceeding on August 11th, 2019, specifically to investigate these 4chan posts. Primarily to investigate this second 4chan post. A formal grand jury subpoena was sent to 4chan on August 14th, 2019, seeking identifying information on both the first post and, again, more aggressively on the user who made the second post, detailing the apparent removal of Epstein while he was still alive at 4:15 a.m. From here on, we'll be focusing in solely on this post and the associated user who made it. It doesn't stop there, not by a long shot. Apple, AT&T, and Citibank were all also subpoenaed shortly thereafter as well, with the goal of acquiring the IP address, 4chan deletion records, customer personal identifiable information, and phone logs from the user who made the post. Each of these companies swiftly complied, and very quickly, the anonymous poster seems to have been identified. In the documents, we find that their name was left unredacted on several pages. Roberto Grijalva. Attached in the PDF, we see the pile of detailed bank records Citibank sent to the DOJ from Grijalva's account. Included is a massive record of his private transactions. This is disturbing on its own, knowing that they aggressively pursued the identity of this anonymous poster. Even more concerning, if this really was just some harmless conspiracy post made by some troll who lied on the internet as a joke, then why did the DOJ commit so many resources and dive so deep into who exactly made that post? This aggressive, swift reaction kind of makes it sound like they struck a nerve with the FBI. This had a lot of people wondering, did Roberto Grijalva reveal the truth? Whether or not they witnessed this themselves or just happened to give a lucky guess, the intense FBI action seems to indicate some truth to the statement. But we haven't even gotten close to the crazy part yet. Digging through the personal records revealed in the subpoenas, we can find some information related to where this Roberto Grijalva might reside. If we go to page 158 of the PDF, we can see a partially redacted address revealing that they live in the Bronx in New York City. Further searches for the term Bronx within the PDF reveal that Grijalva clearly lived and was active in the Bronx, meaning they absolutely lived in an area where they could have worked at the correctional facility where Epstein died. If we go to a separate document released by the DOJ, we'll find a list of documents coming from the Metropolitan Correctional Center in New York. It's a massive PDF, 1,000 pages to be exact, and it covers a wide variety of the operations at MCC surrounding Jeffrey Epstein. Take a wild guess whose name is all over the employee records. So, the 4chan post wasn't some troll in California or Texas or Florida. No, it actually came from a worker at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in New York, specifically, according to these documents, from someone who directly came into contact with and visually monitored Epstein during his duties. He's listed here as having conducted a visual search on Epstein during his day shift exactly 1 month before Epstein died. The implications here are staggering. Now that we've verified that the 4chan poster was legitimately an actual officer at the MCC, we can start to take this post with a little bit more credibility. A lot more credibility, actually. At this point, I think it's safe to assume that Roberto is not a troll. He is writing about an actual experience that he had. Even if he's mistaken, I don't think he's lying. I think the fact that he was actually there shows that he's talking about something that he at least believes he actually experienced. We know from the files that he has personally come into visual contact with Epstein multiple times during his job, and with that in mind, he's now telling us that he saw that same person be wheeled out of the facility at 4:15 a.m., and none of that was recorded on any of the facility's books. This event is completely missing from any official reports. He explained in that August 10th 4chan post that, quote, "The trip van did not sign in and we did not record the plate number. You guys, I am shaking right now, but I think they switched him out." When we pair the 4chan post and everything else we just discussed with all the other evidence we still have to get through, I'm not saying he's actually alive out there somewhere. I'm really not. All I'm saying is that some puzzle pieces do seem to coincidentally be falling into place. Anyways, on to the next mind-blowing piece of evidence. We know these two papers are from his jail cell because of these photos taken during the initial walkthroughs of the scene as it was found on August 10th. We'll begin with this first one. The top of the paper simply states, quote, "Redacted kept me in a locked shower stall for 1 hour. Noel, the same guard who would eventually reportedly find him dead, sent me burnt food. Giant bugs crawling over my hands. No fun." However, it's not this section that brings my attention to this document. It's this section down here. When we take this piece of loose leaf paper and flip it upside down, we can read the words, "Jail out equals 10. Of course, knowing that he died on the 10th of August makes this yet another crazy coincidence to add to the mountain of others. I found an annotated version of the document online that seems to accurately put together some of the other writing on the page. I was a bit interested in this part here, which says FLD, maybe short for Florida, as well as these 3 letters here, which appeared to me to be a 3-digit airport code. However, upon looking deeper into it, I couldn't find any airports with the codes IWJ or IWU, or anything similar to those two outside of Iwami Airport in Japan, but I don't believe that's what this note is referencing. If you can put something else together from this, then let me know in the comments, but I don't really see anything here. The very next sequential document in the files is this other note found in the same manner, and this is the one that absolutely blew my mind when I first saw it. Let's start with the top right corner. We have a sort of mind map with the words MIA or Visa, US in the middle. Branching out from this are the words Visa, no rights, tourist, exit tax, banks, guards, government, clan or clear, the letters LSN or LSR, Muslim, K equals 3 exclamation points, gangsters, among many others I want to dive into. For one, I'd be willing to bet that Mara can be linked to Judge Kenneth Mara, who was the federal judge who reviewed part of Jeffrey Epstein's 2008 plea deal in Florida. Not sure exactly how this might be relevant. What absolutely is extremely relevant is this circled section, which says Red Notice. Raise your hand if you know what that means. Anyone? Well, a red notice is a request issued through Interpol asking law enforcement worldwide to locate and provisionally arrest a person who is pending extradition, surrender, or similar legal action. It's essentially a globally circulated notice that states, if you locate this person, detain them so the inquiring country can seek extradition and bring them back and they can be prosecuted. Now, why would Epstein be so interested in Red Notice if he's already in jail in the US and can reasonably assume he's going to be stuck in this system for a long, long time? Unless, of course, he was considering the fact that he might get out and potentially was weighing the risk of being brought back should he be caught. It gets crazier. Something I don't think I've seen anyone point out yet is this little section right here that I guess the annotators couldn't put together. You know what I think it says? I think it says blackmail with a $sign next to it. Weird. Scrolling down, it gets even more unbelievable. We see the words jet, US prop, maybe it actually says jet or prop, as in propeller plane, not sure. Panning to the left, we very clearly see the words Israel and Gaza with a word above Gaza that might say people, but I'm not quite sure. Next, over here, there seems to be a pretty clear illustration of a plane and what I believe to be an airport sitting next to it with the word Brad written in the middle. I couldn't find any other airports in Israel, Gaza, or the US which might be referred to as Brad, so it's possible that this was referring to a person and not an airport, but I'm not sure. Below this, we see the letter G and the phrase computer-PB ? Which I assume is referring to a computer in Palm Beach, Florida, where Epstein obviously had a residence. If you want my opinion on these two documents, I'd say they are extremely suspicious. Not enough to conclude that anything actually happened or was planned, of course, but enough to kind of make you go, what was he talking about, if not an escape plan? I mean, there's discussion of red notice and the possibility of extradition, perhaps in regard to him being located once he makes it outside of the US. There's discussion of Israel, which is where I think any rational person would assume he would run off to. Gaza, airplanes, blackmail, banks, visas, gangsters, and again, that very suspicious phrase, jail out equals 10. Now, you might be asking yourself, how could he have possibly gotten all of this information? If some sort of a plan had been communicated to him, and he was actually taking notes on that plan in that jail cell, then how did he receive that plan while in jail without the facility knowing? Well, we might have an answer to that question as well. And it comes from a source that is tasked specifically with protecting the public in the event that the institutions that are supposed to protect us fail to do so. The Office of the Inspector General of the Department of Justice. This is the independent oversight office that audits, investigates, and reviews the DOJ's programs and personnel with the explicit purpose of detecting fraud, waste, abuse, and misconduct. Although it is housed within the United States Department of Justice, the OIG's independence is protected by the Inspector General Act of 1978, which grants it separate authority to conduct audits and investigations on its parent organization. The act prohibits interference with its work. In June of 2023, the Office of the Inspector General published an investigation into the Bureau of Prison Supervision of Epstein at the MCC in New York. Given the protections afforded to the OIG, we can assume this is probably one of the most impartial federal investigations into Jeffrey Epstein's death. On August 8th, Epstein met with his attorneys at the prison, as he had on prior occasions, and signed a new last will and testament. MCC New York officials did not learn about the new will until after Epstein's death. The following day, August 9th, Epstein's cellmate was transferred to another facility, and he was not assigned a new cellmate. Also on August 9th, after meeting at the prison with his lawyers, MCC New York staff allowed Epstein to make, in violation of BOP policy, an unrecorded, unmonitored telephone call before he was returned to his SHU cell. Although Epstein said he was calling his mother, in actuality, he called someone with whom he allegedly had a personal relationship. It is not elaborated upon as to what that last part means. How do they know that it wasn't his mother and that it was somebody else, but we don't know who that somebody else was? As you'll see later in this section, there are a lot of really oddly vague statements like this in the OIG report that I really don't like. But regardless, in the 2 days before his death, we now have several confirmed communications between Epstein and parties on the outside of the system, with one being his lawyer and the other, suspiciously, being someone on the other line of an unrecorded and unmonitored phone call. Weird. Could this have been where he received some last-minute information regarding the plan for what was to come on the 10th? Did he then return to his cell and write down all those notes, which might hint at a potential escape plan? Again, though, it's important for me to note that this is all just a theory. There's no concrete proof that allows us to conclude anything beyond a shadow of a doubt. This next piece of evidence supporting the theory that Epstein is alive has been discussed a lot on the internet lately, but I'd be remiss if I didn't also cover it in this video. And that is Jeffrey Epstein's Fortnite account. Yeah, probably sounds like a complete joke to those who aren't familiar with it, but I promise you, beneath the surface, this account is actually hiding some crazy information. We begin with the username LittleStJeff, or LittleStJeff1, which appears across the Epstein files. I've heard some people pronounce it as LittleStJeff, but I believe it's a play on the name of his island, Little St. James, and that it was actually intended to be pronounced as Little St. Jeff. Regardless, one of the many email addresses Jeffrey Epstein had was LittleStJeff@yahoo.com. And based on other emails released in the files, we can see that it was also the name of his personal YouTube account, which he owned as far back as 2014. Epstein also received account recovery emails to his primary account, jeevacation@gmail.com, regarding the LittleStJeff@yahoo.com address, verifying that Epstein was in fact the owner of these accounts. Also in the files, we find this hilarious email, an alert simply stating, May 7, 2019, 6:30 p.m., the $25.95 charge was for V-Bucks on Fortnite. I feel it's important to note that Epstein's final arrest occurred on the 6th of July 2019, so at the time this email was sent, he was still free. Building on all the information regarding the LittleStJeff and LittleStJeff1 username, a Fortnite account under the username LittleStJeff1 was found recently, earlier this month in February of 2026, shortly after the latest file release went public. Using websites like FortniteTracker.com and Fortnite.gg, users across the internet have dove into the historical stats of this account and uncovered some absolutely mind-blowing information. For starters, consistent stats clearly suggest long-term use of this account, rather than it being a brand new creation. Here's where it gets crazy. So for those who aren't really familiar with the game Fortnite, as time passes, different events and storylines occur throughout the game, categorized into chapters and seasons within those chapters. These chapters and seasons only run for a certain amount of time before the game moves on to the next season. These screenshots show consistent activity within Fortnite Chapter 1 between Season 3, which began in February of 2018, through Season 6, which ended in December of 2018. Several months later, we see that email regarding V-Bucks purchased for Fortnite on May 7th. 2 months later, on July 6th, 2019, Epstein was taken into custody. During his time in jail up until his death on the 10th of August 2019, no activity was recorded on the Fortnite account. The username of LittleStJeff1, which is a known username of Epstein, the email showing V-Bucks being purchased, as well as the drop-off in activity around the time of his incarceration, is very interesting. Does it prove that this is his account beyond a shadow of a doubt? Definitely not. Either way, I'm sure most of you can see where all of this buildup is headed. The account activity then picks back up in Season 10, which ran August through October of 2019. It continues on and off from there over the years into Chapter 6, Season 1, which ran between December of 2024 and February of 2025. On top of this, probably the most insane part of this whole thing is that the Fortnite Tracker website showed that the account was currently based in Israel. Kind of reminds me of that handwritten reference to Red Notice listed on that paper in his cell from earlier. All of this information quickly led to accusations of a staged death, especially given the fact of Epstein's deep ties to Israel. All very interesting. Again, though, might this be a coincidence? Sure, absolutely, but could you imagine if this was the straw that broke the camel's back? If Epstein's Fortnite activity was what outed his escape? After that, things very quickly get super sketchy in a pattern we've become all too familiar with in the Epstein case. Public discussion of the LittleStJeff1 Fortnite account and its connection to Jeffrey Epstein began on the 5th of February, with people slowly beginning to discuss the suspicious username, timeline, and location of the account. Within what seems to have just been hours of this discussion arising on the internet, the LittleStJeff1 Fortnite account was set to private by the account owner, meaning its stats could no longer be viewed on the tracking sites. Now, I find this to be very strange, because if this was in fact a troll, usually it's kind of the holy grail when the joke blows up and tricks a ton of people. Like, if this person was messing around and made this account specifically to pretend to be Jeffrey Epstein as a joke, why would they instantly private their account after the news of it started spreading? It feels like that would kind of be the whole point of doing something like that. Regardless, only the next day, on the 6th of February 2026, Fortnite felt it necessary to officially respond to the situation in a Twitter post, where they attempted to brush off any suspicion surrounding the account, claiming that it was all just a joke or a troll from some unrelated user. Hey, official Fortnite here. This was a ruse by a Fortnite player. A few days ago, an existing Fortnite account owner changed their username from something totally unrelated to LittleStJeff 1 following the revelation of LittleStJeff 1 as a name on YouTube. These Fortnite trackers only display your current name, not any prior changes to it. We have no record of the subject's email address referenced in the public document existing in the Epic account system. Since the public document releases, people have created Fortnite accounts with similar-looking email addresses and usernames. However, on Twitter, this post ended up getting community noted with the following. This explanation does not hold true when reviewing Fortnite.gg 2025 Wrapped, showing the username tied to the games played in 2025. User ID was consistent in 2025. This is referring to a service that Fortnite.gg provided at the end of 2025, before the revelation of LittleStJeff 1 being tied to Jeffrey Epstein. Essentially, they released a page for each public Fortnite account at the end of 2025 where you could view several important stats from the game in a pre-generated image file. According to several tests performed by users with other accounts, these image files would not update following a name change, and instead, they reflected the account's actual name at the year-end 2025. For example, this account, originally named Demetra, was recently changed to LittleStJeff 12. However, the image file on Fortnite.gg did not update and retained the original username on the Fortnite Wrapped page. And that's what the account was named in 2025. If this is in fact how their system works, then that means Fortnite was not telling the truth, and that back in 2025, before it was revealed that LittleStJeff 1 was one of Epstein's usernames, this account did in fact have that username. If we have this right, then it would mean that the official Fortnite account is lying and covering this up. But again, bringing this back down to earth for a second, do I really think Fortnite is covering up the fact that Jeffrey Epstein just revealed the fact that he's alive because he's playing Fortnite in Israel? Not really, if I'm being honest, although it is absolutely hilarious to consider that fact. The cherry on top of all of this is the fact that this is actually a pretty solid player, and I just can't believe we're literally discussing the idea that Epstein is out there living out his secret life in Israel, dunking on kids in Fortnite. When taking into account the immediate privatization of the account and the quick attempts to address the situation from Fortnite without any actual evidence of the name change, many claim that the whole situation sort of smelled of interference. Next, I want to discuss something that I think more people need to be aware of. I haven't seen a lot of other YouTubers dive to the bottom of this particular lead either, so I figured I'd attempt to do that in this video. That lead being the mystery of DVR-2 within the MCC's security system. We'll begin with this file from the recent DOJ release. This is one of the FBI's FD 302 forms, an official document that agents use to summarize interviews given by witnesses or other activities relating to an investigation. They are often used as key evidence in criminal investigations. Before I say anything else, let's read through this FD 302 form together. The document begins by explaining that on the 12th of March 2020, A man was interviewed by an assistant United States attorney, a task force officer detective, and a special agent. Redacted started working for the Bureau of Prisons, BOP, in 2003 and worked in both New York and Indiana. The BOP worker had some college education, was with the Redacted, and had 10 years' experience in electronics. In 2016, the BOP worker was put in charge of all the cameras at the Metropolitan Correctional Center, MCC. The BOP worker advised that the cameras at MCC were out of date, the recorders frequently went bad, and the cameras were all analog and not maintained properly. The camera system was over 20 years old. Sometimes the screen would be active, indicating that the camera was working. However, the video would not be recording. The BOP worker advised that only one hard drive of the camera system was working at the time of the incident on August 10, 2019. When a DVR went bad, none of the cameras recorded. There was a system failure of DVR-2 on July 29, 2019, and the motherboard failed on DVR-2 on August 8, 2019. The hard drive failure occurred on August 10, 2019. The BOP worker recalled that there was a body alarm around 6 a.m. on August 10, 2019, and he was one of the MCC personnel who responded. He stated that he was one of the personnel who briefly tried to resuscitate Jeffrey Epstein. After the incident, he was asked about the cameras. There were 2 new hard drives to install, but installing the new hard drives would mean that all prior data would be lost. The warden wanted video, and so Redacted was told to start working on the system. Redacted started removing the bad drives in order to rebuild the DVR. Redacted advised that an FBI agent was the one who pulled out the DVR. Redacted also advised that he knew that by replacing both drives, the system would be wiped, and that he had advised personnel at MCC of that. This part, specifically the part about the FBI agent being the one who pulled out the DVR, is one of those odd coincidences that, when strung together with all the other odd coincidences, seems to paint a picture of deliberate cover-up, signifying the existence of a beast that exists far beneath the surface of anything that any of us are fully aware of. However, in this video, I'm making an attempt to distinguish between what I believe is a true coincidence, accident, or otherwise innocuous event, and what is actually suspicious. If we actually want to get to the bottom of this, we can't be pointing our finger at every odd occurrence in this story and present it as evidence. We have to actually do the hard work and dig deep into what these occurrences might mean, and out of those, pick out the ones that truly hold weight. Essentially, we need to eliminate the noise of anything that actually might just be a coincidence. We need to be very careful with what we choose to label as evidence of a larger corruption operation, because if we choose wrong, we lose credibility, and we give these people the option to label this whole thing as some crazy conspiracy theory. We need to be viciously precise. Of course, the public is immensely skeptical of Epstein's taking himself out in that jail cell on that night. Many of us have considered the idea that he was murdered, or, to a lesser extent, that he was covertly extracted alive. This theory, for the most part, assumes that Epstein truly did play a role as an intelligence asset. This gets tricky because this assumption also means essentially any official investigation from the federal government might be manipulated to protect themselves and their intelligence infrastructure. According to both the BOP workers' testimony from earlier and the OIG report, it sounds like the MCC's surveillance system at the time of Jeffrey Epstein's death on the 10th of August was, in fact, a chronically neglected, over 20-year-old analog setup. Quote, the OIG's investigation revealed a history of camera problems at MCC New York. In August 2019, the electronics technician was the only such technician at MCC New York. The electronics technician told the OIG that when he began work at MCC New York in 2016, he found that the facility's security camera system needed to be upgraded. According to the electronics technician, the system had not been properly maintained prior to his arrival, the hard drives and the DVRs frequently malfunctioned and needed to be replaced, and the overall system was outdated, in part because the cameras were analog and not digital. The electronics technician told the OIG that throughout his tenure at MCC New York, the camera system was subject to frequently recurring failures, particularly with respect to the DVR hard drives. In accordance with what I said earlier about being precise with the evidence we bring to the table, it's important that we do concede the fact that this system was horrifically outdated. The facility known for holding Bernie Madoff, Ramzi Youssef, John Gotti, El Chapo, and Jeffrey Epstein was using an analog security system in 2019. That's one point I'm going to take away from the DVR failure being part of the cover-up, and one point I'm going to give to it just being plain old government negligence and stupidity. I mean, what? They could have replaced those cameras with GoPros for a couple $100 each and wired them into the computer and had a more reliable security system. According to the Inspector General's report, quote, all video surveillance from MCC New York's cameras was connected to a digital video recorder DVR system. The DVR system had two data storage systems that were labeled DVR-1 and DVR-2, and each consisted of 16 hard drives used for storing digital recordings. Roughly half of MCC New York security cameras were assigned to record to DVR-1, and the other half were assigned to record to DVR-2. Cameras assigned to DVR-1 only recorded to the DVR-1 hard drives, and cameras assigned to DVR-2 only recorded to the DVR-2 hard drives. Therefore, if DVR-2 crashed, no video from the DVR-2 assigned cameras could be retrieved from DVR-1, and vice versa. You know, at the same time, though, as much as this does kind of sound like negligence, particularly when it comes to the maintenance of the system, it really is strange that this perfectly timed cascade of hardware failures happened specifically to DVR-2, the one DVR that was actually covering Epstein's cell. July 29th, 12 days before Epstein's death, a, quote, catastrophic disk array failure occurs in DVR-2. August 8th, 2 days before Epstein's death, a motherboard failure occurs in DVR-2. August 10th, the exact day of Epstein's death, a hard drive failure occurs in DVR-2. The first of those three hardware failures, the catastrophic disk array failure, which occurred on the 29th of July, completely halted the recording of all cameras covering the special housing unit, which included Epstein's tier, meaning no video whatsoever was apparently being captured from that point on. No video from Epstein's unit was apparently recorded after that point, including during his death just 12 days later. The BOP did not learn about the failure until August 8, 2019, when the Special Investigative Services, SIS, Lieutenant and Associate Warden 1 attempted to review recorded surveillance video for a matter unrelated to Epstein. The SIS lieutenant told the OIG she discovered that no recorded video was available for several of the institution's cameras, so she reported the matter to the communications office, and the electronics technician arrived to assess the problem sometime before his shift was scheduled to end. The electronics technician told the OIG that before Epstein's death, no one was specifically tasked with ensuring that video from the cameras was being recorded. The OIG found that there are no BOP policies that specifically state that institutional staff must perform periodic checks to ensure the camera system is fully functional or that security camera systems have the capacity to record. Again, no matter how you look at it, the negligence here is beyond unbelievable, but that doesn't give them an out. Because it is in fact this very negligence that could certainly have made it quite easy for an FBI mole within the BOP or broader DOJ to intentionally render this DVR-2 inoperable in a way that appears to be an accident. What am I proposing? That an FBI agent waltzed his way into that room and personally, knowingly ensured that no footage of Epstein could have possibly been left behind? That would be crazy. Except, as we already covered, that's exactly what happened. Again, if we go back to the FD302, quote, Redacted started removing the bad drives in order to rebuild the DVR. Redacted advised that an FBI agent was the one who pulled out the DVR. Redacted also advised that he knew that by replacing both drives, the system would be wiped. There are many other oddities in relation to this portion of the story that I couldn't really get to the bottom of. One of them being that in the FD302 from the BOP employee, he writes that, quote, only one hard drive of the camera system was working at the time of the incident on August 10th, 2019. What does that even mean? He doesn't elaborate on this fact beyond that, and the Inspector General's 121-page report doesn't even mention this single operable hard drive in DVR-2. The main question that I'm wondering after all of this is, was there any significance to that single working hard drive out of the 16-drive array? Is it possible that that drive contained any sort of useful information regarding that night? If it was working as the document says, does that mean that it was actively writing new information? And if it was, what information was written on the 10th of August, 2019? Even if it wasn't recording properly due to the DVR-2 failures, it sounds like there still was one good drive left in there. Unfortunately, the vagueness of these reports doesn't really specify exactly how this disk array system worked, and more importantly, if there was any other crucial information from that night still on that hard drive that was never recovered. There are discrepancies no matter which theory you personally believe, whether you think he took his own life in that jail cell, that he was murdered, or that he is in fact actually still alive somewhere. I want to make it clear that, if we're being honest here, nobody knows for sure exactly what happened to him, or how exactly it happened. There is evidence for and against each theory, and if we want to get to the truth, we need to analyze this objectively without any preconceptions. With this in mind, it's time that we discuss some of the challenges with the theory that Epstein is still alive, and some of the evidence that has been presented in favor of the theory that I don't personally think makes the cut. I want to take a look at the photos of Epstein which were released by the DOJ following his officially reported death. Obviously, I'm not going to be able to show the full photo here because it's just too graphic. There are many discrepancies that appear in this set of photos that came after the death. Discrepancies that many say serve as evidence that the person in these photos is not actually Jeffrey Epstein. Several photos released by the DOJ clearly show Epstein with this tattoo around his left bicep. I've seen some call it a barbed wire tattoo. However, there are instances of Jeffrey Epstein and others in his circle mocking Jesus, as I've discussed before, so I wouldn't be surprised if this was actually supposed to be a crown of thorns. Regardless of exactly what this tattoo was, it doesn't appear in that photo of his body following his death. In fact, it doesn't appear in any of the photos of him taken after he died. Some say this is a piece of evidence supporting the idea that this body is not actually Epstein's. However, as we've established before, it's important for us to explore this from every angle, and this is one of those pieces of evidence that I don't believe is worth holding on to. The tattoo is also seen in this photo, where it appears to be rubbing off. If we go back to the original photos of the tattoo, it looks, to me anyway, like it's too shiny and too fresh to have been a permanent actual tattoo. As a result of all this, and the fact that there are no other photos of Epstein with this tattoo outside of these two sets of images, even in the ones where his biceps are visible, I believe it's safe to say this was a temporary joke tattoo. However, this isn't the only issue people have brought up regarding the photos following his death. Epstein's autopsy, conducted the following day on the 11th of August, ruled his death a suicide by hanging, citing fractures in his neck bones. Yet almost immediately, leaked photographs of his body on a gurney being wheeled into the hospital sparked widespread speculation that the images were not actually of Epstein, but of someone else. A wide range of different posts were made, zooming in on his ears and his nose, claiming that the nose appeared more round compared to the straighter profile seen in earlier shots of Epstein. Others claimed that the shape of Epstein's ears in the photo didn't match how they appeared in earlier photos of him. However, critics of these theories, and specifically this image which shows the comparisons, point out that this alive photo came all the way back from 2004, 15 years earlier, and they attribute the discrepancy to natural aging or post-mortem swelling rather than a completely fake body. And again, to be fair in our assessment, it definitely is true that rigor mortis and the bodily processes following death will obviously cause facial distortions. When we take into account the knowledge that the body was likely left alone in that cell for hours, it's likely that it had already been left motionless at room temperature for a very long time, speeding up all of those different processes. Another theory I came across suggested that the body resembled Tony Rodham, Hillary Clinton's brother, who had died almost exactly 2 months earlier from undisclosed causes in June of 2019. I've seen a handful of these posts suggesting that Rodham's corpse was substituted after Epstein had already been removed from the facility. These posts are usually accompanied with side-by-side images claiming the two had similar jawlines and hairlines. Personally, after looking at the photos of Tony Rodham, I don't really see the resemblance, especially when taking a look at all of the newly released photos following Epstein's death. Furthermore, the fact that this body was processed through the medical system at the New York Presbyterian Hospital without any hiccups requires the assumption that a massive cover-up also existed within the hospital. And yet, no hospital employees, doctors, nurses, or related personnel have ever come forward citing any irregularities that morning. If I haven't already made it clear yet, I'm remaining objective in this video, partially because I want to allow you all to draw your own conclusions here, but also because I honestly have no idea what happened to Epstein, seriously. The facts point in all sorts of different directions. As I'm sure you're starting to piece together, the more you dig into Epstein's death, the more confusing it gets. At times, there seems to be insane connections, like the 4chan post. Connections which intuition can only say, no way that's a coincidence. But then other times when I see some of these photos, which, sorry, I can't really show them on YouTube, I think, that's definitely Jeffrey Epstein. The tattoo theory falls apart according to the research we just dug into, and I also really don't think this looks like Tony Rodham either. Never attribute to malice that which can be adequately explained by stupidity. I had that razor pop into my head when exploring the 2 MCC guards earlier who fell asleep and falsified their checks on Epstein. As wild as many of the coincidences are surrounding his death, this specific fact, to me at least, just reeks of sheer laziness and ignorance. Could they have been paid off or threatened to stay away from Epstein's cell that night? Sure, I'm not saying that's impossible. But it's also possible that these 2 goobers legitimately fell asleep and or didn't care enough about their jobs to actually do them. On top of all this, as you've surely seen by now, there are several different photos circulating around Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter claiming to show Epstein alive and disguised in Israel with long hair, a beard, and sunglasses, often accompanied by bodyguards on the streets of Tel Aviv. However, I think it kind of goes without saying that obviously these are all either AI or digitally altered photos, and you can prove this for each case. Some are just obvious edits to older photographs taken before his death, and others are just completely generated by AI. The primary AI-generated images that all these low-quality news pages have been sharing with some version of the caption, "Jeffrey Epstein spotted in Israel," literally comes from a post in the subreddit r/hardAIimages on February 1st, 2026. In this original post, there's a very clear Google Gemini watermark in the bottom right-hand corner. People have literally been cropping the watermark out just to get likes on Instagram or whatever. Nowadays, it's always best to be skeptical when coming across images like these. So, where does all this leave us? As I've said from the beginning, I really don't know. At this point, I almost want to dive into the other, even more widely believed theory that Epstein actually was murdered in that jail cell, rather than the idea that he escaped. Even though it's difficult to pinpoint exactly what it is, this whole situation just reeks of a cover-up of some kind, and I want to say society's collective intuition is telling us that something isn't right here. According to a poll conducted by the Washington Post in July of 2025, only a measly 15% of Americans actually believe he died by his own hand. Another 42% are unsure exactly what happened, and finally, 44% say they believe he was murdered. Not that I really want to keep making these videos on Epstein forever, because honestly, these are super taxing to create, but if you guys wanted to see me explore that theory, the one that he was murdered, more in depth, let me know in the comments, and maybe I'll go for it. There's so many other insane facts and coincidences that we didn't even touch on here, because they, again, seem to point to this other theory that he was killed in order to keep him silenced. Regardless, I hope you guys enjoyed this deep dive into this insane theory. I really want to hear your thoughts on this in the comments. I will see you guys in the next one.